The fourth time I attempted to cross the border into Nevarra from Orlais and was turned back by chevaliers, I decided to take the more roundabout path. A ship back to Ferelden and then another to Nevarra. The outcome was more than worth the trouble. The whole country is filled with artistry, from the statues of heroes that litter the streets in even the meanest villages, to the glittering golden College of Magi in Cumberland. Perhaps nowhere is more astonishing than the vast necropolis outside Nevarra city. Unlike most other followers of Andraste, the Nevarrans do not burn their dead. Instead, they carefully preserve the bodies and seal them in elaborate tombs. Some of the wealthiest Nevarrans begin construction of their own tombs while quite young, and these become incredible palaces, complete with gardens, bathhouses, and ballrooms, utterly silent, kept only for the dead. Greetings and welcome once again, my dear students, to another exciting lesson of Dragon Age, the history and lore of Thedas. So exciting, in fact, it is going to send chills down your spine. I feel it in my bones that you are all going to think this will be a cracking lesson. From my horrible bone and skeleton puns, some of you might have already guessed the subject of today's lecture. Namely, the land of necropolises, dragon hunters, and mummification, the kingdom of Nevarra. So, without further ado, let's start with a bit of geography. Right in the middle of the continent of Thedas lies the nation of Nevarra, very much characterized by the presence of the great Menanter River that flows through much of the nation and east towards the Free Marches. This makes Nevarra and their neighbors to the east along the water some of the most fertile regions on the continent. To the north of this region, the desolate Silent Plains stands between Nevarra and Tevinter to the north. Through much of the country, over the Menanter River and down towards the country's southern coast, stretches the ancient Imperial Highway. As we will find out during the course of the lecture, the kingdom started out as one single city-state, Nevarra City, and then grew throughout the ages until it became a proper nation-state. Today, the kingdom encompasses 4 major cities: the capital, Nevarra City, the southern coastal city of Cumberland, that has become one of the largest cities on the continent, the city of Hunter Fell, and lastly, the city of Perendale to the west, close to the Hunter Horn Mountains. Said to be a land of incredible beauty, its gardens likened to that of a dazzling dream and paintings come to life, Nevarra is a fair and vibrant country. The Kingdom of Nevarra is, as the name suggests, a feudal monarchy and is governed as such. Succession is normally hereditary, and sometimes a successor is chosen from among the immediate family, but there have been several instances in the nation's history where the ruling monarch have been ousted during coups and uprisings. 2 major royal dynasties have ruled and shaped the history of the nation in the past: the Pentaghasts and the Markhams, with the former being the current ruling dynasty. The history of these 2 great dynasties will be explained further on in the lesson. The Nevarrans of central Thedas, many of them descended from the Planacini tribe of ancient times, have a very vibrant and unique culture that is expressed in many different ways. As with Orlais and the Anderfells, and as stated by Brother Genitivi in the opening quote, Nevarra is a nation filled with fascinating and beautiful art and artistry. The necropolis of the capital and the college in Cumberland notwithstanding, Nevarrans, especially Nevarran nobles, have a special appreciation and fascination for legendary heroes of the past, and influential ancestors. Therefore, Nevarran cities and towns, big and small, often house numerous amounts of statues depicting important historical figures, folk heroes, and mythical individuals of the past. Nevarrans are also the inheritors of a long and proud military tradition. Through military conflicts in its past, Nevarra has not only grown as a nation-state, but have also proven its military capabilities in several wars against its western neighbour, Orlais, and many Nevarran kings and rulers from both of the historical dynasties have proven themselves as competent generals and military strategists. The Nevarrans' love for artistry and the heroes of the past is encapsulated perfectly in the capital, which has given the nation its name, Nevarra City, with architectural wonders like the Grand Necropolis or the Castrum Draconis, filled with statues of the kings and queens of old, among columns of black marble. The city is also a trading and cultural hub for the nation, and displays different aspects of Nevarran culture during each season of the year. For example, in the summer, as trade booms on the Menanter River, colored flags are hung on the river boats and the street markets along the water. Goods and wares from far and wide is bought and sold, as the common folk risk the crowded waters of the river to bathe and cool off in the summer heat. And the nobles gather for the Duchess game at the Anaxas estate, where scholars and other learned folk engage in rhetorical and philosophical games while sipping tea. As summer turns to autumn in the capital, the ancestral pageants are held in the city, as hundreds of lanterns are lit along the many streets to illuminate statues of revered ancestors, heroes, and monarchs that are draped in the colors of their houses. Troops of actors are hired to act out the deeds and legends of these famed ancestors, with the Pentaghasts and Markhams competing fiercely among each other, even showing off famed treasures like the legendary ebony dragon armor of kings to act out famous battles from the nation's past. In the winter, as bitter winds blow across the city and the Menanter freezes to ice, vendors sell hot spiced wine and roasted chestnuts along the riverside, while ice skaters who dare to brave the ice are seen spinning and gliding on the frozen surface. During this season, balls and festivities are also held indoors to commemorate the traditional dragon hunts of old. More on that later. And, as spring rolls around, the ice melts away from the river as trade ships return to the city and markets become overcrowded as the people revel in finally being able to go outside again in the pleasant spring warmth. During the start of the second month of Plutanis, the Winter's End tournaments are held. Normally they are held all across Thedas, but they are much more extravagant and awe-inspiring in Nevarra, as the nobility partake in exciting competitions like sword fighting, archery, and jousting. There still exists one important cultural aspect central to Nevarra that I have not gone into detail yet, as it indeed requires some in-depth explanation. Namely, the Nevarrans' unique perspective on death. As opposed to most other Thedosian countries where the dead are cremated in memory of Andraste's own death, Nevarrans instead mummify their dead and then bury them in tombs. For the Nevarran noble class and the wealthy of the kingdom, this is a status project that they perfect and nurture throughout the decades of their lives, as many wealthy Nevarrans start building their grave complexes and tombs at a very young age. These tombs can sometimes sprawl to encompass gardens, ballrooms and bathhouses, veritable palaces where only the silence of the dead reigns. Gifts, treasures, and prized possessions from when the person was alive are often kept in the tombs of the dead. The crypts and tombs of the Nevarrans are by no means uniform in nature. In fact, each Nevarran tomb is as unique as the family that is buried there. The capital of the nation, Nevarra City, even has an entire section of the city dedicated to the tomb complexes of the dead, a great mausoleum known as the Grand Necropolis, where only the most honored and well-respected are entombed. A great many of Nevarra's kings and queens lie interred in the Grand Necropolis, along with entire lines of noble families, heroes, and foreign dignitaries and ambassadors of note. It is almost a city of its own, dedicated entirely to the dead and mummified. This practice might seem a bit strange. Indeed, many might even find it unnerving and grotesque. Outside of the nation, inflated stories of the death-obsessed Nevarrans and their twisted ancestor worship have resulted in this becoming a common stereotype heaped upon Nevarrans. But where did these traditions come from? Why is the Nevarran culture so focused on death and the dead? To answer these questions, we have to delve into a bit of philosophy. Nevarrans believe that upon a person's death, the soul of the individual passes over from this world to the Fade. There, the soul of the dead, intentionally or not, displaces a native spirit of the Fade. To avoid this displacement, the Nevarrans mummify their dead so that the Fade spirit can reside within the mummified corpse, thus creating a safe host for the spirit, which, if left displaced and wandering, would have caused more harm than good. Whether this is actually true or not is a topic that scholars have debated for a long time, but this is nevertheless the accepted view of death and burials in Nevarra, and it has been so for a long time. Ever since the Tevinter Magister Vitus Fabria became the advisor to the Nevarran king Caspar Pentaghast during the Glory Age, this has been the ruling philosophy on the subject in Nevarra. Fabria was the first one to spread this idea to the nation, and with the king's approval, the Magister founded an important magical order dedicated to the preservation and veneration of the Nevarran dead, the Mortalitasi. The Order of the Mortalitasi, mentioned briefly in my lecture on magic and the Fade, is central to not only the preservation of Nevarran dead, but also serve an important role in the administration of the kingdom. Clad in grey robes, these death mages, as they are called outside of the nation, are experts in the field of mummification and burial rites. They are the guardians and keepers of the Grand Necropolis in Nevarra City, performing burials and other rituals so that the honored dead can come to rest within its grand halls. Interring, caring for, and protecting the dead is their solemn duty, and they spend much time studying the nature of death and the arcane significance surrounding it. This knowledge is needed, for the arcane practice of letting spirits reside within corpses raises some arcane questions. Some spirits, that are energetic in nature, might try to enact the unfinished business of the host of which it is now a part of. Does this mean that even though the soul supposedly have left the body, the spirit now residing in it have knowledge of the previous mind that resided there? Some Mortalitasi believe that certain individuals that are referred to as the higher dead are able to retain their souls in the body even after death, while others within the order claim that this is ludicrous and quite impossible. To seek answers to questions like these, the Mortalitasi are known to experiment with the magical art of necromancy, bearing foul reputation in the rest of Thedas for the use of animating corpses and skeletons, sometimes even having the same stigma as blood magic, or even considered to be synonymous with it. The mages of the Mortalitasi have a different viewpoint when it comes to necromancy. To them, necromancy honors not only the host body, but also the spirits that are drawn to inhabit it, and that are used in rituals. It gives them purpose and a place of sanctuary, and, in combat situations, The Mortalitasi mean that the fear that necromantic spells can cause will deter future enemies from fighting you, as well as making use of the bodies of the dead for a higher physical purpose than to simply waste away. Within the magical order, Mortalitasi members sometimes make use of necromancy to create animated servants and guardians that will guard them in their day-to-day duties within the Grand Necropolis. Some create skeletal horses to ride on, while others bind spirits into human skeletons to use as assistants. Summoning minor spirits like wisps are also a common practice among the Mortalitasi. Although the basics of mummification and other lesser funerary rites are known to the wider Nevarran populace, the deeper secret of the craft and necromancy overall is kept secret by the Mortalitasi. Within the Grand Necropolis and down into the lower crypts, each member performs their duties faithfully. Two sub-factions of the Mortalitasi exist within the complex of the giant mausoleum, with specific tasks of their own. The first is the Guides of the Path, who are responsible for the administration and transportation of corpses. The second is the Mourn Watch, the mausoleum's security force and protectors that watch over the ancient crypts to make sure that nothing is tampered with or stolen. The Mourn Watch also keep an eye out for and deal with magical disturbances within the necropolis. Sometimes, mistakes happen during funerary rites, or spirits happen to possess something they should not. The Watch deal with these incidents and places wards within crypts to prevent unsanctioned possessions in the future. Their magical knowledge and wisdom makes the members of the Mortalitasi sought after by the rich and powerful in Nevarra, and it is quite common for the nobles to employ members of the order as advisors. This level of respect and tolerance for the Mortalitasi is commonplace in Nevarra, but outside of the country, the death mages are mistrusted and even feared in some places by their fellow mages. Many argue that their use of necromancy is borderline apostasy and linked to the practices of maleficarum and blood magic. And while the Mortalitasi are better trained and have more control over their animated servants and spirits, the very practice of mummification increases the risk of corpse possession, making people understandably skeptical towards the Nevarrans' burial practices and the Mortalitasi's dabbling in necromancy. The fact is that foreign propaganda spreads rumors and tell tales of the Mortalitasi as a strange death cult that practices vile necromantic magic in the catacombs of the Grand Necropolis, and that they manipulate the nobles and royals that have hired them into following the Order's secret agenda. While much of this is hyperbolic nonsense, the secretive practices of the Order itself, the unknown deeper practices and rituals of mummification and necromancy that are kept secret to anyone but the Order, sadly does not strengthen the case for the Order. Whether their rituals are blood magic or not, sanctioned or not, is hard to say. But they are a central part of Nevarran culture, and are tolerated by the rest of the continent for now. While on the topic of mages and magic, let us touch on the culture of magic and the Circle of Magi in Nevarra. Outside of Tevinter, the most magically advanced country of southern Thedas is the nation of Nevarra. Nevarran mages are highly organized arcane practitioners. They are competent scholars and skilled entrepreneurs, with influential ties to both politicians and the royal house. This is a far more tolerant perception of mages than many other countries under the guidance of the Orlesian Chantry. Nevarra also houses the famed College of Magi in the city of Cumberland, the place where the high-ranking members of the Circle of Magi, the first enchanters, gather to elect Grand Enchanters as representatives of the Circle to the Chantry. The college itself is a marvel of architecture, with the building's golden dome, known as the Sun Dome, sitting on the top of the building and can be seen from miles away. Ever since the Pentaghast family took control in Nevarra, the practice of dragon hunting have been practiced readily in the nation, particularly by the upper class. The Pentaghasts themselves have numerous famous dragon hunters among their family, stretching back ages. Mostly, these hunts were undertaken for the awesome glory of being able to slay a mighty dragon and the fame of which such a feat would entail for the slayer in question and his family. But hunts could also be launched to acquire valuable materials from the slain dragon in question, like its blood, bones, scales, and so on. Most often, these hunts would take place during the winter, since dragons are known to be more sluggish and more easily surprised during this season, as the hunters would track the beast to its lair and slay it. To commemorate these hunts, hunt balls would be held in the country at the time, and are still held today as a special Nevarran winter tradition. Traditionally, the focal point of these balls were the head and heart of a slain dragon, but possibly due to the potent smell of this body part and organ, in modern times the dances of the balls are the main centerpiece. Dressed in flowing red costumes or even armor, the couples participating in the dance take inspiration from the thrill of the hunt in an impressive show of fast and lively dance moves. Sadly, the fervor of the Nevarran dragon hunters led to dragons almost becoming extinct on the continent of Thedas. From having burned entire cities to the ground and swallowed flocks of livestock, dragons were hunted so thoroughly that many thought the species had been wiped out entirely during the Steel Age. This was not the case, however, as we now know, as dragons once again showed up at the start of the Dragon Age, in great numbers, and have once again become part of Thedas' wildlife. Having grown from a marcher city into a fully fledged nation during the ages, Nevarra have had to establish itself firmly during the years, so as to not be seen as an easy prey for the larger nations of the continent. Despite historical conflicts with Tevinter, other marcher cities, and especially Orlais, which have lost a fair amount of valuable territory to Nevarra in recent memory, the nation holds stable foreign relations with other countries. Its competent military leaders, confidence-instilling culture, and lucrative trade, particularly in Cumberland, which has become one of the largest cities on the continent during the last 100 years, have cemented Nevarra as an important political nation in Thedas. Taking a page out of the Orlesian book, Nevarran's perspective on food is quite aesthetic in nature. For Nevarrans, food should not only taste good, but should also look good in terms of plating, arrangement, ingredients, and so forth. Presenting a beautiful dish will heighten the appreciation for the food, so to speak. A perfect example of this mentality is the staple Nevarran dish of blood orange salad. This dish consists of neatly cut slices of oranges arranged artfully lying on a bed of greens and nuts. Another Nevarran dish that is both tasty and pleasing to the eyes is Nevarran flatbread. Able to be turned from dough to bread in mere minutes, this tasty bread is extremely popular not just in Nevarra, but abroad as well, in countries like Tevinter. And there are several alternatives when it comes to how you want to eat the dish. Some prefer just the bread, while others eat it with a collection of dips like yogurt or brushing the bread with olive oil and eating it. One Ferelden chef in particular hypothesizes that the flatbread would be very tasty if eaten with a good stew. There is no shortage of heroes and legendary figures throughout Nevarran history, and those Nevarrans who live in modern time are by no means less impressive. Here are some Nevarrans that you might or might not know of from the world of Dragon Age. We start, of course, with Cassandra Pentaghast. She is a renowned warrior, member of the Seekers of Truth, right hand of the Divine, and more recently, a pivotal member of the resurrected Inquisition. As a member of the royal house of Pentaghast, She is also the 78th in line to the throne of Nevarra. Then, we have Speaker Vius Anaxas, Mortalitasi mage and trainer for the Inquisition in the magical ways of the necromancer. And lastly, we have Tessa Forsythia, a runaway noble, and later an agent of the Inquisition. Now that we know of Nevarra as a nation and its culture, it's time to delve into its summarized history. We start, as we usually do, in the Ancient Age. After the arrival of humans to the continent of Thedas, many different tribes spread across the lands in the following centuries. The humans that would settle what would later become Nevarra and the Free Marches were known as the Planacini tribe. The Planacini were a highly sophisticated people for their time, with not only a strong animistic faith, but they also developed their own written language, which resulted in a surprisingly long and detailed written history of the tribe. These men and women were farmers that worked the fertile land of central Thedas, winding its way along the Minanta River. The river was sacred to the ancient Planacini and was known under a different name, the Panemoics. In our last lesson on Orlais, we mentioned the Inghirsh tribe, who were defeated and driven away from their homeland by the Nevarrans to the north, during the time of Thalcian the Dreamer in the -1500s. Those Inghirsh that did not become a part of the Syrian tribes to the south sought refuge in the lands of the Planacini, and were absorbed into their community. Unfortunately for the Planacini, after having conquered the lands of the Inghirsh, the Nevarrans, under their king Antoridas, prepared to conquer their land next. The Chant of Light is the main source for this tale, and if it is to be believed, the Planacini were ruled by a king at the time by the name of Damartes. Loyal to the Maker in contrast to the Nevarrans who had started to worship the old gods, Damartes managed to defend against the first attack from the north. The king's oracles had foreseen that the enemy would secretly attack from the east and burn the fertile fields before them, so the king ordered his subjects to douse the fields of the east with water from the sacred Panemoics, as the oracles anointed the Planacini soldiers with water from the river. Even though Damartes' army had held their ground against the 7,000-man strong Nevarranian army, his own losses had been great as well. Knowing that his army would not be able to withstand another attack from this mighty enemy, Damartes, just like the Nevarranian king Antoridas had done before him, abandoned the Maker and sought help from a demon who promised him victory. This demon is referred to in Threnody 6 as Her, which have led some scholars to believe that it had to be the old god Razikael, the only known female old god, who led Damartes astray. Nevertheless, the demon spread a horrible plague to the Nevarranian army, which made them flee back north, but the Maker had now turned his eyes from the Planacini. Whether true or not, the Nevarranians did not manage to expand to the lands of the Planacini under the rule of King Damartes, and they remained independent for another 7 centuries until they were finally subdued and conquered by the mighty Tevinter Imperium. The lands of the Planacini would endure under the yoke of the Tevinter Imperium throughout the years of its golden age. The tumultuous years of the Planacini descended Archon Tidarion's reign, and all the way through the devastating 2 centuries of the First Blight. But the Imperium's control over the region would come to an end during the last centuries of the Ancient Age, and the arrival of the Maker's Bride. In -180 Ancient, a mighty Alamari army crossed the Waking Sea to invade the lands of the north, held by Tevinter, led by Andraste and her husband Mafarath. They brought the words of the Maker and sought to end the slavery and tyranny of the Imperium's magisters. The lands of the Planacini fell to the invaders as many flocked to Andraste's cause, chief among them a man called Hector. As the lord of the fortress of Nevarra, Hector became one of Andraste's most loyal and faithful followers as the Exalted March moved on, and Nevarra became one of Andraste's great strongholds in the region. Hector would also meet his end in this fortress, as it was in Nevarra that Andraste was betrayed by her husband and captured by Tevinter forces in -170 Ancient. According to legend, Hector bravely leapt to the prophet's defense before being murdered by a hail of arrows, surviving long enough to see the Tevinter soldiers drag Andraste away. Because of this, Hector of Nevarra is still remembered to this day by the Chantry faithful as one of the Anointed, a title given only to those few who have shown exceptional devotion to Andraste's teachings. A defender of the faith truly worthy of being seen as the hand of the Maker. With the death of Andraste and the spreading of the cult of the Maker, the lands surrounding Nevarra city were given by Maferath to his son Verold, so he in turn could mold it into a nation powerful enough to act as a bulwark against Tevinter in the future. In stark contrast to his brother Isarath, however, Verold leveraged his father's name to secure his power and influence instead of actually building anything substantial of his own. His name was so interwoven with his father's reputation, despite his father's reclusiveness and silence, that when the betrayal of Maferath was finally revealed to the world in -160 Ancient, it led to Verold being overthrown and his entire court being killed. After this, Verold became a victim of the precursor of the Grand Game in Orlais, and as for Nevarra city, it would grow into an independent marcher city. Over the following centuries, the city-state of Nevarra city, officially a part of the Free Marches, came into its own as an independent city ruled by a king. It was far behind other city-states in the region, however, and political infighting along with poor leadership resulted in an uncertain future for the common man. This was still the case well into the Glory Age, and by this point, rulers had come and gone at such a pace that no effective change were instituted during their ineffective reigns. The ruling king of Nevarra city at the time, King Ionis, was no exception to this rule. Having accomplished little during the decades he had ruled, King Ionis was used and taken advantage of by power-hungry advisors and friends who wanted to benefit themselves, while at the same time the king suffered from very poor health. As these state parasites continued to undermine the city's rulership for their own gain, some among the advisors and even many ordinary Nevarrans were of the opinion that Nevarra city would not be able to function as an independent entity in the future. Why not become part of the Orlesian Empire, like it had been during the days of Blessed Emperor Dracon, thought some. Others argued that another more powerful Marcher state, like Starkhaven, should take control of the city. There was even rumors about a group of advisors that had already come to an agreement with either of the two mentioned parties to give up the city's sovereignty in exchange for rich rewards. This never came to pass, however, as one man saw the death spiral that Nevarra was in and sought to change it himself. His name was Caspar Pentaghast. Originally hailing from the, at the time, small town of Hunter Fell, just west of Nevarra city, Caspar Pentaghast had seen the decline of King Ionis and the city overall, and decided to take matters into his own hands, to prevent Nevarra from potentially falling into foreign hands. At the ripe old age of 60, he managed to successfully overthrow King Ionis and seize the throne of the city-state in the year 246 Glory. A far more ambitious and competent ruler than his predecessor, Caspar managed to turn the ship around, so to speak, as the city slowly grew in influence and prosperity. Despite his age, King Caspar was a wise and competent ruler, if the Pentaghasts' own family history is to be believed. with him also came the Nevarran political traditions of influential and powerful royal dynasties. It was during his rule that the Mortalitasi were founded, and the king frequently went on great dragon hunts in the company of hundreds of knights to rid the land of the beasts, which at this time apparently made life outside the cities extremely dangerous. Apparently very spry for his age, King Caspar killed many dragons during his rule, and lived, according to family legend, to the astounding age of 127, showing absolutely no sign of decrepitude in his advanced age. His last day alive was apparently spent sparring and besting his great-grandson in combat before retiring to his chambers for his afternoon nap, and quietly passing in his sleep, after having ruled Nevarra city for 60 years. His body was mummified and laid to rest in the Grand Necropolis, and years later, the Pentaghast family crypts would be built around his own crypt. Sitting on a throne of marble, with a crown of gold on his head and his silver sword in his lap, the corpse of the king is still tended to by the Mortalitasi to this day, and it is custom for the children of the Pentaghast family to come and visit the corpse once they become old enough. For his many deeds in life, the king became one of Nevarra's many legendary heroes, and is known to the history books as King Caspar the Magnificent. A few years after the passing of the first Pentaghast king of Nevarra, the Third Blight would break out in 310 Towers. After years of fighting, the Darkspawn threat was finally neutralized as the Grey Wardens came together with the Orlesian and Tevinter armies to liberate the lands of Nevarra and Hunter Fell from the monsters. At the Battle of Hunter Fell, in 325 Towers, the archdemon Toth was slain in a bloody battle and the Blight was ended. Sadly, the citizens of Nevarra and Hunter Fell suffered a great betrayal as the Blight came to an end. For while they were still celebrating the triumphant victories of their liberators, they were taken completely by surprise as the Orlesian and Tevinter forces now turned on the severely weakened Marcher states. As Tevinter took control over Hunter Fell, the Orlesian forces did the same with Nevarra city, occupying the city-state and its surrounding territory. While Hunter Fell managed to break away from Tevinter in 349 Towers, the Orlesian occupation of Nevarra city would last for 40 years, until the king Caspar II famously retook the city from Orlais, making him one of the most revered Pentaghast kings in Nevarran history. Once again an independent city-state, the Pentaghast dynasty would rule Nevarra city up until the years after the Fourth Blight, during the Exalted Age. The end of the first Pentaghast dynasty came at the hands of a Nevarran noble and general by the name of Tylus van Markham. Van Markham had fought in the recent Blight and had become a hero to the common man, and with this newfound celebrity status, he used his influence to level scathing criticism towards the ruling Pentaghast dynasty and the sitting king, Nestor Pentaghast. Van Markham claimed that during their 3 centuries of governance, the Pentaghasts had abandoned the traditional values that made them a great and honorable noble house, as well as claiming that corruption had been rife within the court and administration of the Pentaghasts for the last decades. Fueled by these fiery accusations and rhetoric, the populace started to stir against the ruling dynasty. To give himself more legitimacy, Van Markham claimed to be a descendant of Cordillus Dracon, the first emperor of Orlais, and thus a man of royal blood. Finally, the rage of the common folk had grown so strong that Van Markham, in the year 537 Exalted, instigated a coup to overthrow the Pentaghast dynasty and install himself as king. King Nestor Pentaghast was killed while seated on the throne of his ancestors, slain by 16 stab wounds. Tillus van Markham now proclaimed himself the new king of Nevarra, as the surviving Pentaghasts fled to their ancestral city of Hunter Fell. Staying true to his military career, the now King Tillus of Nevarra started to expand the borders of the city-state into something greater. Along with many of the Western Marcher cities, King Tillus managed to check the growing influence of Orlais in the region, and managed to win several border wars against the Orlesians from 538 Exalted and forwards. Of note is the Battle of the Fields of Ghislaine, where a cadre of knights from several Marcher cities managed to hold off an Orlesian chevalier charge so that King Tillus could escape the battle alive. Had Van Markham died that day, it would have probably spelled the end for not just his dynasty, but the independence of Nevarra. But due to the brave sacrifice of most of the Marcher knights, he was able to make a tactical retreat. Most of the Marcher knights died that day on the fields of Ghislaine, but they had become heroes in the eyes of the rest of the Free Marches, and were credited with the continued survival of Nevarra as a sovereign entity, even though Nevarrans themselves would be a bit reluctant to admit this today. The knights became known as the Fallen, and their legend is still well known in this region of Thedas to this day. Meeting with several military victories during his reign, King Tillus van Markham managed to expand the once small city-state of Nevarra into a proper nation-state. The Van Markham dynasty would continue after the death of Tillus with 3 other kings that would continue their forefathers' military expansions against Orlais by occupying much of the empire's lands in the area. As the last Van Markham king died without a male heir in the following Steel Age, his daughter reconciled with the Pentaghast family by marrying a Pentaghast and uniting the 2 noble houses for the good of the Nevarran nation. Thus, the Pentaghasts once again emerged as the ruling dynasty of the nation, forming the second Pentaghast dynasty. Nevarra's status as a powerful nation had been restored, and the Van Markhams received a privileged role above the other sections of the nobility due to this historic marriage. It was also during this time, from the year 615 Steel and onwards, that the Pentaghasts' reputation as legendary dragon hunters really became known across Thedas. From being able to roam unchecked during the time of Caspar the Magnificent, the methods pioneered by the Pentaghasts throughout the ages on how to best hunt and kill dragons had been so effective that by the Steel Age, the beasts had almost been driven to extinction. Now a sizable nation-state with military reputation and muscles to take on Orlais, Nevarra would persist under the following ages under the watchful guidance of the monarchs of the second Pentaghast dynasty. There would be an attempt for reconciliation between Nevarra and Orlais, however, during the Storm Age, with the reign of the Orlesian Emperor Etienne Valmont I. Since his ascent to the Orlesian throne in 771 Storm, up until 782 Storm, the Orlesian Emperor had remained childless, his wife somehow unable to produce an heir for him. So it was under great pressure that Etienne set aside his wife that he had been married to for 17 years in order to marry a Nevarran princess. The Pentaghasts had relatively recently come back to power and were eager to establish new political alliances in order to solidify their governing status once more, even bridging the conflicts that the Van Markhams had had with Orlais in the past. And so it came to be that Sotiria Pentaghast, Princess of Nevarra, married the Orlesian Emperor in 782 Storm. But this marriage would sadly not produce any children either, for what reason we do not know. So in 797 Storm, after 15 years of marriage, Emperor Etienne sent Sotiria away to a cloister, so that he instead could remarry once again, this time with his Orlesian mistress, Yvette. This marriage would result in 2 twins some years later, but the fact that the emperor had so brazenly shoved aside his Nevarran wife outraged his eastern neighbors. To the Nevarrans and the Pentaghasts, this was a great insult, both shameful and dishonorable, flying in the face of their previous arrangements. Cartloads of angry letters arrived to the imperial palace in Orlais, with the emperor taking no heed of them, making the situation even worse. Eventually, a small Nevarran war party entered Orlais and reclaimed their beloved princess. But despite the high tensions between the two nations, the Nevarrans took no further military actions against Orlais. They instead waited for the right time to pay back this treachery. As Brother Genitivi puts it in his works, quote, "The Nevarrans were strategists and knew to bide their time. In 846 Blessed, while most of the Orlesian army was committed to war in Ferelden, the Pentaghasts began their war against Orlais. The Orlesians rallied a defense and drove the Nevarrans from Ghislaine and Arlesant, but at the cost of much of their northern territory. Perendale was lost and never recovered, a lingering sign that peace between the two nations was impossible." End quote. The city of Perendale had been on the Pentaghasts' mind for a long time, not only because the mountains close to the city had once been teeming with dragons, but also for the abundant mineral resources and silver mines that existed in the area. Later in the Blessed Age, in the year 870, another war broke out between the two nations over who could control the western hills of Perendale. This conflict was once again won by the Nevarran kingdom, but the local populace had in turn been spurred into dissent by the Orlesians, and many locals today resent their new Nevarran overlords and yearn for a day when they will be a part of Orlais once again. The Perendale War is a testament and a warning as to why it is a very bad idea to break a promise made to the rulers of Nevarra if you do not wish to meet with dire consequences. In between these conflicts, there was the matter of succession to attend to in Nevarra. In 860 Blessed, it was time to crown the new king of the nation, and many members of the Pentaghast family made bids for the throne. One of these was a man named Aurelian Pentaghast. During the process, however, it was revealed that Aurelian was in fact not a real Pentaghast, but a pretender. Aurelian was the son of an Orlesian minor noble by the name of Gustave Lefleur, who had married the Princess Sotiria Pentaghast after her divorce with the Orlesian emperor. Gustave had come into their marriage with a son, Aurelian, and he was raised by Sotiria in Nevarra as a Pentaghast. A pious man to the core, a product of his father's background, Aurelian believed that the Maker had charged him with returning Nevarra to chantry rule. This would not come to be, as after he was found to not be a real Pentaghast, he went into exile, disgraced and dishonored. His exile would take him underground to the realm of the dwarves, where he, surprisingly, decided to join the Legion of the Dead, becoming the first and only human ever recorded to do so. Clad in an enchanted armor and seeking to regain some of his lost honor, he ventured into the Deep Roads to fight the innumerable darkspawn that dwelled there. Having been shunned by his adoptive home and people, the dwarves hailed him as a hero, although an unlikely one. Although Aurelian was never seen again after his departure into the Deep Roads, pieces of his armor started popping up on the surface in the following decades. Some say Aurelian had returned to the surface in secret and sold the gear. Others said that the armor had been scavenged off his dead body down in the depths. The truth about what happened to the false Pentaghast is most likely only known to the Legion, who keeps their motto of "Our secrets die with us." And so, The final fate of Aurelian is sadly unknown. With their confidence now at an all-time high after their victories against Orlais, the political and military leadership of Nevarra decided to continue to expand the nation's borders by way of war and conquest. This time, their sights were drawn to the east and the Free Marches, and so a bloody campaign of expansion took place. The Marcher city of Hazmal was quick to fall, and the Nevarran king became convinced that the rest of the Free Marches would be easily swept aside. He would achieve what King Pyrrhus of Starkhaven had failed to do ages before, and unite the Free Marches under one nation. This would not come to pass, however, as the Nevarran army was halted and driven back from the city of Tantervale in 882 Blessed by an unlikely hero, a Ravanian by the name of Cade Arvale. For the bravery he had shown in defending the city, Arvale was proclaimed champion of Tantervale, as the Nevarran invasion was turned back and eventually ended. As Philium Abard puts it, quote, Cade Arvale of Ravane did what Orlais had not. He stopped a nation in its tracks. There was blood and barter, but Tantervale is still free against all odds. End quote. At the end of the Blessed Age, the sudden reappearance of dragons in Thedas led to widespread bewilderment and shock around the continent, especially in Nevarra, as many thought they had hunted the beasts to extinction. But this turned out not to be the case, as dragons emerged in numbers previously unseen in 899 Blessed, devastating the lands of Nevarra and Orlais after having emerged in Antiva. Attempts were made to try and slay or cull the re-emerging dragons, but all of these hunts ended in heavy casualties. But the Nevarran dragon hunters now had an abundance of prey to hunt again, as the new age was named the Dragon Age. As the Dragon Age goes on, the Nevarrans have had to deal with a growing succession crisis in the kingdom. The current Nevarran ruler, King Marcus Pentaghast, is in modern time an old and decrepit man with an uncertain mental state. He has been criticized by many of his political opponents to simply be a puppet of his Mortalitasi advisors, who in fact are the real rulers behind the throne, or so it is believed. Members of both the Pentaghast and Van Markham families are lining up to replace him, claiming that the old king is not fit to rule anymore and should step aside so someone younger can take the reins of the kingdom. Other nobles are of the opinion that neither the Pentaghasts nor Van Markhams should replace the old king, that it is time for new noble families to get a chance at rulership. This political conflict is exacerbated by the fact that King Marcus has been the subject of 2 failed assassination attempts during his reign. The first in 908 Dragon, orchestrated by one Baron Gaulin, and the second in 910, organized by at least a dozen prominent members of the Pentaghast family. The second attempt led to a brutal period known as the Nevarran Purge, where not only the conspirators but their immediate families as well were arrested and executed for treason. The court pressured King Marcus into this action, meaning that this would prevent reprisals from vengeful relatives down the line, and the king eventually, though reluctantly, had to agree to the measures. Why is there no heir to the throne then? King Marcus has no known children, and neither does his brother, Ferdinand Pentaghast, who would be the closest direct successor to the throne. A legendary dragon hunter and famous scholar on the topics of dragon blood usage and properties, Ferdinand has clearly stated that he has no interest in becoming king of the nation. And though he is King Marcus's youngest brother, Ferdinand is also very much an old man at this point. During the recent re-establishment of the Inquisition in 941 Dragon, an agent of the Tevinter cult, known as the Venatori, managed to infiltrate the Nevarran court and used blood magic to control King Marcus's mind and actions. This agent was thwarted with the aid of the Inquisition, who also helped Nevarra in neutralizing several Venatori strongholds along its border with Tevinter. Despite the recent help from the Inquisition, the future of Nevarra is very much uncertain, and we will all have to wait and see who will ascend to lead the nation after the inevitable death of the ruling monarch. Now that all of you have a good understanding of this very fascinating Thedosian nation, I will end today's lesson here. Next time we meet, the city-states of the Free Marches will be the subject of study. Until then, I hope you all study well and have a nice time out in the warm and sunny weather. I have been Professor Absalom, and I will see you all in the next lecture. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, and check out the other videos on the channel. More interesting lore videos will be coming in the future, so keep an eye out. Thank you once again, and until next time, have a good one.